it felt like that locker room had started to really come undone, right? You got, granted, former players calling out Derek Carr. You got, uh, you know, Chris Olave is getting hurt, and his parents and brother are all chirping on social media. And again, it was an emotional thing. I understand that what families go through. Then you got Colin Saunders, and he's getting into back and forths with guys. It just seemed to me like it had just kind of lost its way. I think Darren Rizzi needs to pull the reins in and say, hey, win, lose, or draw, there is a level of expectation. If you want to be on this team this year, this week, or moving forward, there is a level of expectation of how you're going to handle yourself.
Welcome to the NFL on Fox podcast, presented by Verizon, the NFL powered by Verizon 5G. I am your host, Dave Hellman, and we are into week 10. Season is flying by, y'all. I don't know how we already got to November, but we have got some fantastic matchups in the NFL. So much to talk about this weekend. Starting tonight, Thursday Night Football, truly delivering the goods. The rematch of the AFC North rivalry, Bengals-Ravens, played a classic earlier in the season. Cincinnati now travels to Baltimore. Joe Burrow trying to avenge an overtime loss from earlier in the year. Some big matchups. We got Steelers-Commanders. Night game on Sunday, the Lions playing the Texans. The Buccaneers hosting the San Francisco 49ers right here on Fox. We're going to dive in to all of that, as well as the trade deadline that passed since the last time we talked to you guys. We're going to do that with a hand from our buddy Dan Hanzus of the Heed the Call podcast. He was gracious enough to hop on and chat with us for a few. Really enjoyed that conversation. Greg Olsen is back as per usual. He's got a fun NFC South grudge match this weekend. The New Orleans Saints, having recently fired Dennis Allen, trying to get back on track against their old rivals, the Atlanta Falcons, who are playing about as fun a brand of football as there is in the NFL right now. Really enjoyed talking to Greg about that. We'll get into all of that. Did I mention? Oh, yeah, burying the lead. The Cowboys are playing the Eagles this weekend. We're going to talk about all of the happenings in Dallas, most of them still not good, as well as a surging Philadelphia team going down to AT&T Stadium this weekend. We're going to dive into all of that. So much to get to. But at the top of the show, we got a treat for you guys. A chance to hear from the GOAT himself. Tom Brady hopped on the herd with Colin Cowherd on Wednesday and covered a bevy of fascinating topics. Talked about his game last weekend, the Detroit Lions beating the Green Bay Packers up at Lambeau Field in a monsoon. He talked about the trade deadline as well. Really enjoyed his insights on DeAndre Hopkins joining the Kansas City Chiefs and how big that relationship is between him and Patrick Mahomes. Talked about his old playing days, what he is reminded of watching this year's teams. So much good stuff between Brady and Colin.
So I was thinking about this, Tom, as I'm watching Kansas City. I still feel like I said they're like an electric vehicle that's only charged about 50%. They're kind of trying to figure out what they are. Backup running back. They don't know what to do with Xavier Worthy. They just kind of go back. Your Randy Moss team, boom, you knew very early it's special. But did you ever have a team that won a Super Bowl, but in the middle of a season, you didn't quite know what the offensive identity was? Because that's what I watch when I watch the Chiefs.
I actually think they do have a great offensive identity. I think look, the game's about winning. We talk about points, you talk about, yards, and you talk about penalties and defensive stops. To me, at the end of the game, do you have more points than the other team? That's the maturity of a great team and a great organization. I played on a lot of teams. Some were a lot of offensive strengths. Some had a lot of defensive strengths. Some years we were kind of middle of the pack at both, but we played well situationally. Third down, red area, 2-minute. Every year, that's the best part about the NFL is the constant transition, the constant change. You see they add DeAndre Hopkins at the trade deadline. So it's like, in the end, when you have Patrick Mahomes and it's a one-score game, everyone's always betting on the Chiefs. Now, can someone get away from the Chiefs? I don't know, because that defense plays so well. But I don't think Patrick Mahomes is a lesser player because he doesn't have 25 touchdowns at this point. It's just he's not playing with guys that can produce that from the receiver position, so that naturally Patrick's job is to, and I covered him a few weeks ago when I said the job of the quarterback is to manage all the variables of the game and the season, injuries, weather, the rhythm of the offense, and then ultimately go out there and make the plays that put you in a position to win. And that's what winners do. And certainly Patrick is that. And then he's got Andy Reid there, who's as great of a coach, in NFL history. He's on the kind of the Mount Rushmore of coaches. So you have this consistency of this organization from owner, general manager, coach, quarterback, and then to me, a defensive coordinator in Spags, that the way that defense plays puts them in a position to win every single week. So it's obviously they can be beat. There's probably games where they could have been beat this year, but every game is decided by a few plays. And the reality of the Chiefs team is they always find a way to make the plays when it matters.
I remember when Randy Moss played with you, when you guys brought a new player in, and you had talked at the time, you're like, Belichick, and you were like, he's just smart and he knows football. So obviously, DeAndre Hopkins doesn't know the entire playbook yet, but I'm watching him and I'm like, especially that play in the back of the end zone, I'm like, God, you'd think they'd had 50 practices. What is it about certain receivers with you, like Moss or DeAndre Hopkins? They don't have to know the playbook, but yet I felt like had I just landed on the planet and watched it, I would have never guessed he just showed up at the facility. What was it with Moss? What is it with a veteran receiver that a young receiver just couldn't do?
And that's a great question. So the reality is a great receiver, well, any receiver that's a veteran knows what a practice week looks like. They know how to run all the routes in the offense. Now, they may not know exactly where to line up because everyone has their variations of words and descriptive words they use to get people aligned, to get the protections organized, and then to call routes. Some people use number systems. Some people use words that people have to memorize. Some people use a one-term word that tells everybody what to do. Kansas City does it kind of a myriad of different ways. And then once DeAndre can really comprehend that, he's going to say, oh, okay, that's what I used to call this outcut in Tennessee was like this, or in Houston it was like this, but in KC it's like this, but I still know how to run the route. So you have these veteran players that have the experience to run the routes, to know the offenses. It's not like, when he played for Tennessee, the field was a different size. It's the same rules. It's the same routes. It's ultimately just how you call them. So once he gets out there and he's confident in what he has, he's going to look like DeAndre Hopkins always has, which is, he's got good quickness. He's got great catch radius. He's got this ability in situational plays to make catches like that. And certainly as a red area target. And I just think if you look at the Chiefs and their injuries at the receiver position, to add someone like DeAndre, who has that veteran presence, and no game's going to be too big for him. He's played a lot of big games. So that always gives a quarterback a lot of confidence. I remember playing with certain rookie receivers. Literally, it was like the first day of OTAs. And I'd call like, hey, run a slant. And he'd look at me like, a slant, okay. And that's kind of the most generic route. Look, since we were running those in parking lots, with your friends. And there was a few guys I played with that they'd start the route slow, then they'd speed up into the break, then they'd slow down coming out of the break, and then they'd look for the ball, and I'd look at them and be like, what the hell was that? There's such a learning curve that needs to happen from a rookie player. Whereas when you get someone like DeAndre, you go, hey, DeAndre, run a slant. And it looks like a slant. It looks great. It's fluid. It's smooth. You can plan it. So with a rookie, there's such a learning curve. There's so many things to learn that you're never going to get that type of production in a short period of time with a rookie that you can get with a veteran, unless that's just a very special rookie. And I've had some of those. Those guys, to me, are more anomalies than kind of what the norm is.
I know you probably haven't sat and watched too many Denver games or Bears games, but with the young quarterbacks, obviously they grew up in a different environment than you, 7-on-7 camps, way more snaps by the time they're 15 than you had. But go back to your career. I remember you doing an interview with Jay Glazer once, and you're like, I've seen everything, dude. You could throw anything at me. When was the time in your career? You're pretty a learned guy. You're very committed. How long did it take? They always talk about things slow down a little. How long? Mahomes said it was year 3. What was it for you?
The question, the answer is it progressively gets more and more. And I would say maybe at year 1, it's 50% of the way that you want it. And then year 2, it's 60%. And ultimately, you're trying to get to 100%. But even I think for Patrick, if I look at his situation and his development, he was very lucky to sit behind. And Patrick, let me get this out of the way. He's a phenomenal player. To me, is, he, Lamar, Josh Allen, you're talking about the upper echelon, as we all know. And Patrick is going to go down as one of the greats ever for a number of reasons. But if I look at him, he went to college at Texas Tech. He had Cliff Kingsbury there with him for 3 years, an NFL caliber coach running a lot of NFL caliber type calls and methodologies behind what he's doing. So he had 3 years of that. Then he goes to the Chiefs, and he's got Alex Smith as the guy that's ahead of him, who's a phenomenal player, great leader, does everything the right way. And then he's got Andy Reid as his play caller. So it's like there's a reason why it all works, and there's this development that happens, and why Patrick has been able to ascend so quickly. And he would have found a way to ascend at some point anyway. I'm just saying I could never have reached this area of growth that I needed to, whether that was year 1 or 3 or 5. It was accelerated because of all the things that I had in place. When I was in college, I ran a pro-style offense.
Yeah.
I got drafted. I had Bill Belichick teach me. I got to sit behind Drew Bledsoe. I worked really hard to learn all those things and embrace the challenge. And I think when you're a young quarterback, ultimately that's what you're trying to do. Be in a situation where you can learn, grow, develop. It's all about mentorship. It's all about the people that come in your life. I see Bo Nix from Denver. He's got Sean Payton there. He's a phenomenal coach. He's going to get great coaching. They're going to have great scheme. A lot of times the first reads for him are going to be open because he's got a great play caller that knows how to design things. So then you go on the other side of it. I've seen a lot of quarterbacks that don't make it. Maybe they wouldn't have made it anyway, but I'm just saying there's a potential that they could have. Look at Sam Darnold now. He's playing really well in Minnesota. He's got a good coach. He's got a good scheme. He's got some good receivers. He's playing well. When he was at the Jets, he didn't have all those things quite in place. So we always have to look at, I think, the physical makeup of these young players. What are they capable of? Do they have good arms? Do they have great arms? Are they athletic? Can they get out of the pocket? And then to me, there's a mental element that always comes into quarterback play. And I said in this last game against Green Bay, I was watching Green Bay Lions this last weekend, I said, there's no way for me to really see sustained success in the NFL at the quarterback position if you don't have total control of what's being done out on the field. If you're expecting your coach to call a play from the sideline, and that play is going to come into your helmet, you're going to call it, you're going to walk to the line of scrimmage, and that play is going to be successful regardless of the defensive look, you're out of your mind. That's not the way it works. The defense calls plays to stop you, and they have their own tendencies. So it's up to the quarterback ultimately to decide, okay, I got a play called. I see what the defense is doing. Is this play going to work or not? If it's going to work, you run it. If it's not, what do I need to do to survive the down? Or what do I need to do to put us in a position to be really successful? That, to me, is the operational control the quarterbacks need. And the problem is with the development of college programs now, they're not getting developed in the same way. Now they get to a pro program, and a lot of the NFL programs, there's so much money going around. The need to develop is guys can sign 1 or 2 contracts and not develop and still make a great living. So I would love to see the quarterback play continue to evolve and grow. It's only going to come from more time on task, more time with your coaches, more understanding of what your roles and responsibility are. You're supposed to develop a toolkit as a quarterback to deal with what you see on the game every single day. I seen Jared Goff, again, covering him this last game. It was awesome to watch. In LA, he had a great system. He had McVay to learn under. He brought that. He comes to a phenomenal program in Detroit right now, where to me, they're doing a lot of things the right way. Their offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, says, all right, Jared, we're going to put more and more on your plate. We're going to give you a great opportunity to succeed. And you have to have the ability to process a lot of information, which is one of Jared's strengths, to actually implement all those things. And when you do it well, to me, that's what gives you a great chance to win every single week in the NFL.
So Bill Belichick said a couple of weeks ago when asked about Detroit, he's like, they've got everything offensively. You hope they make a mistake, and you just called the game. And Green Bay's got a good team. It looked like older brother, younger brother, let me teach you how to play football. Go back. I mean, Detroit O-line, tackles, run game, tight end, quarterback. Go back to your career. Because I felt like Green Bay very quickly was like, we're a little out of our element here. This is a really, really. Yeah. So go back to your career. Was there ever a team you played, and you may not have said this to your teammates, but you thought to yourself, I'm not sure they have a weakness. Like that is Pro Bowlers everywhere. I watched Detroit's offense, Tom. I don't know what the weakness is. Deep ball, slants, slots. Did you ever face a team like that where you looked at the personnel and thought, it's almost a perfect offense?
I would say the early Colts offenses we faced, they had Saturday, they had Terry Glenn, tight end, they had Pollard, they had at times Dallas Clark, they had Marvin, they had Reggie, they had Stokely, they had Edgerrin. They were so good, and I'm lucky I didn't have to go against them. I mean, to me, it was great. Belichick would say, guys, listen, this would be a Wednesday meeting. Understand this. They are going to move the ball on us. They're too good. They got so many guys. They're going to go up and down. We need to play good red area defense. And we're going to work on red area defense on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday because that's going to decide the game. They're going to get the ball down there, which is a great humility from a coach who's a defensive coach, who's essentially the coordinator, to say, these guys are so good, we're not going to just pull the wool over eyes and think that we're going to keep these guys at 240 yards offense. They're going to have yards. What we need to do is keep the points down. If we can keep the points down, and offensively, we can control the game, we can run the ball, and then we can score points, we're going to give ourselves a best chance to win. That, to me, is complementary football.
Right.
So when you play the Lions, the only way to beat them is to play a style where the offense complements the defense, and then the kicking game does their job. Sometimes when you punt, you play great field position. Okay, offensively, the best defense against the Lions offense, to me, is possess the football. You don't want to make it a track meet against a team that can run it. They throw it to their tight end. They throw it to their receivers. When they get Jameson Williams back, they have the explosive receiver. So there's so many, and they go for it on fourth down so often. You got to stop them from 4 downs, not just 3, which is a really hard thing to do. So there's a lot of challenges that the Lions are presenting. And look, the one game they did lose this year, they were 1 of 6 in the red area.
That's right.
Against the Bucs.
Yep.
So to me, they got a great offense. They got a lot of humility. They got a great culture. To me, they're doing so many things the right way in the NFL right now.
So you're calling the San Francisco game this weekend. When and I think Brock's a good player, but I also think, you're a great example of this. Executives miss all the time on players. Antonio Gates and Tony Romo weren't drafted. There's players all over. I watched the kid for the Rams this weekend. Some undrafted safety had his 4th pick. There's talent everywhere. What was the thing when the first time you saw Brock Purdy? Obviously, you weren't wowed by his size. His arm strength is good enough. Yeah. What was the first thing that you saw? I wouldn't see this. You would see this, and you thought, that guy's pretty good. Like, is there something that you see because you played the position, a tell like in poker, that you were like, this kid's going to work?
Sure. So I think it's poise and composure. It's calm under chaos. That's what the quarterback needs to do. And he walks into that huddle. He needs 10 other guys looking at him go, all right, man, you're totally under control. And whatever you say, we're going to do to our best because we know you're going to deliver. And they all have that confidence in Brock as a player. And you're right, Brock's not the biggest. His arm strength isn't like Aaron Rodgers. But if he can play with anticipation, and this offense, to me, even studying the last few days, is a lot different than the one that they had last year and the year before. They had so many weapons the last couple years. You know, Brock essentially was a point guard out there just delivering balls to halfbacks and flip it out there to Debo and gain yards. And then he's got Ayuk, you know, catching in cuts and running for a lot. Oh, you forgot about Kittle. Boom, we're going to throw over the top of you there. This offense has been in and out of a lot of their great players. And I think getting McCaffrey back is so important for this offense because he provides that passing threat out of the backfield that they just haven't had this year. So now the defense has to come up closer to the line of scrimmage to defend the run with Christian as well as the pass. And that, to me, opens up more of the intermediate and deeper parts of the field for Brock, where they've kind of been throwing more of these intermediate-type targets on the field, which I don't think is necessarily the strength of that offense. So if they can get back, if they can get Christian back playing well with Mason and McCaffrey, wow, that's a great group. Then at receiver, obviously losing Ayuk is a brutal loss. But they drafted Pearsall in the first round. He's going to get his legs underneath him. You still got Jennings, who to me is one of the most underrated receivers in the NFL, performed so well in the Super Bowl. They have a ton of confidence in him. And then Debo, his versatility. You still got Juszczyk, who's a ridiculous chess piece for Kyle. And then you have Kittle, who can turn up from time to time and go, holy cow, we almost forgot about him. And then not to mention a phenomenal offensive line. So they still have all the pieces in place. Now, they've kind of always seemed to turn around their season around the bye week. This is when they need to do it. They just had their bye week. We'll see, you know, if they get Greenlaw back on defense, that would be a huge boost. Unfortunately, what they really missed on defense, they lost Hargrave. They lost this interior rusher. So now it's really kind of a one-man show with Bosa on the perimeter. But if they can get Greenlaw back and get him playing close to the way that he was playing in there with Warner, you have one of the best tandems in the league, if not the best at linebacker. They rush the quarterback a little better. And then that secondary unit, which has always got a lot of tight coverage, they can capitalize on offensive mistakes. So I would never count out the 49ers. I think they're so well coached. They got a great system in place, a great culture of guys that know how to win. You know, those are all the things you look for with the Niners.
7 rings, Tom Brady, Fox Sports, taking time for us today. Tom, I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Great talking to you, partner.
All right.
I'm here for you anytime. You know that.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that.
Kind of eye-opening hearing Tom Brady compare this year's Lions team to the early 2000s Colts teams that he used to go against. If you're a youngin', I don't think you need a history lesson, though. The names he was rattling off are incredible. Like, I mean, the Colts, obviously, they had Peyton Manning, but Edgerrin James is in the Hall of Fame. Marvin Harrison's in the Hall of Fame. Reggie Wayne could be in the Hall of Fame soon. Dallas Clark and Jeff Saturday are Ring of Honor caliber players for the Indianapolis Colts. Like, all decade caliber players at every position. So to compare the Detroit Lions to that collection of talent, I mean, I think it's completely fair and completely accurate. The Lions are loaded practically everywhere. All-pro receiver, one of the best young tight ends in the game, stars at every spot on the offensive line. Jared Goff playing like an MVP, 2 of the best running backs in the NFL. It makes sense. I agree with him. It's just kind of crazy to stop and take stock of that fact. And moving on from the Lions, I think they have clearly established themselves as one of the class of the NFL, let alone the NFC. Team we're not talking about in that category quite as much would be the Atlanta Falcons, but maybe they're changing that. Here's my weekly conversation with Greg Olsen, who is calling his 3rd Falcons game in a row, a team that really seems to be rounding into form, going down to face the New Orleans Saints. All right, Greg, Falcons at Saints this week. I got to be honest, man, it kind of feels like you're embedded with the Atlanta Falcons right now.
Listen, I'm not going to complain. They've been fun. They've been great to work with. I love Raheem. I've known Raheem for a long time. Fun calling them. And it just seems like every time I call their game, they get better. They get better. They got a lot of good players. They got a lot of good guys to talk about. Cousins is playing well. So if you're going to call the same team 3 weeks in a row, it helps when they're playing well.
I'm interested by that because you guys in the broadcast game, as soon as you're done with one, you're watching the tape of the next game, familiarizing yourself with the names and the positions and all that stuff. When you get a chance to settle in for 2 or 3 weeks and keep an eye on the same team, how much have you learned about the Falcons, or what do you feel like you'd still like to see from them, or still learn from this team?
I mean, I think it makes it easier in some regards, but it also makes it a little harder, right? So easier, the players, the coach, the names, the numbers, what it looks like, the basic storylines, what their style and philosophy, that becomes very easy when you call them so often. But then the challenge becomes, how do you continue to keep it interesting? How do you continue to find new fun storylines, new things to dive into, that if you're a Falcons fan, it's not like, hey, I'm listening to the same broadcast every single week. So last year, it kind of happened to us a little bit with the Cowboys, where we did like eight or nine Cowboy games when the playoffs got around. And it was like, how many more ways can you talk about Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb that you haven't already covered? So there is a challenge to that. But specifically with Atlanta, I've gotten to know Zach Robinson through our calls, through being on the field in pregame. Didn't really have much of a relationship with him. Gotten obviously to talk to Raheem a bunch and Kirk. And, now all of a sudden this week you get to talk to Jesse Bates, maybe somebody that you didn't know real well, and you get to hear from them. So you definitely get a deeper dive as the weeks go on when you just happen to call the same team. This will be my third in a row. So it's easier. And there's also a challenge of, like, you want to keep the broadcast fresh and dig in and find other things to talk about.
I'm so curious about the production calls that y'all do, probably because as a longtime beat writer, I always wanted to be part of them. I was like, man, I would love to know what they're saying in there. This is an interesting one because, like, on one hand, you get a team where, like, at this point, I got to imagine you and Raheem, you and Zach Robinson, it's like, hey, man, it's me again. What's going on?
Yeah.
And then on the other side of it, you've got Darren Rizzi, who is taking over for Dennis Allen after he was let go by the Saints. This is like the first time he's been doing this stuff, period. So you've got a very, like, polar opposite sort of situation as you're getting to know these teams. Like, what's your approach to getting in there with both of these coaching staffs and both of these teams?
Yeah, so it's funny. I've actually known Darren Rizzi since I was a freshman in high school. So
Is that right? Okay.
Darren's a North Jersey guy, played in North Jersey, played at Bergen Catholic, which is a big powerhouse football program up in North Jersey where I grew up. So I've known Darren. He's known my dad. Darren was a coach. Darren then he was a head coach at Rhode Island. He was a head coach at was it New Haven?
I looked him up. I think that's right. Yeah.
I think it's right. He definitely was the head coach for maybe just 1 year at Rhode Island. But then where I really got to know him, prior to that, when I was in high school, was he was at Rutgers with Greg Schiano and Mario Cristobal and all of those guys. So I have a lot of connections with Darren. Actually saw him on the sideline of the Miami game. He's got a son who is a freshman at Miami, plays linebacker. So I've known Darren for a really long time. I'm happy for the opportunity that he's getting. And I hope he does a good job. It's not an easy situation for anybody, but Darren has a lot of respect around the league, a lot of experiences at different levels, and he's been a head coach before, albeit at the college level.
It is a tough situation. Obviously, 7 losses. I mean, you move on from your head coach halfway through the season. I think that kind of speaks for itself. Where do you start if you're Darren Rizzi? How do you, and particularly against a team that's really surging right now? I mean, that is a loaded question, and there's a lot of stuff the Saints need to improve. But where do you try to start with this team right now?
I think before you dive into the X's and the O's and what plays we need to run and what style defense we should now run, and who's going to take over play calling, Joe Woods, or who's now that Dennis Allen's gone, however all that plays out, before any of that gets discussed, I think what led to Dennis being fired, and this is just pure speculation, is it seemed like not only were they losing games and all that, but it felt like that locker room had started to really come undone, right? You got, granted, former players calling out Derek Carr. You got, Chris Olave is getting hurt, and his parents and brother are all chirping on social media. And again, it was an emotional thing. I understand what families go through. Then you got Colin Saunders, and he's getting into back and forths with guys. It just seemed to me like it had just kind of lost its way. I think Darren Rizzi needs to pull the reins in and say, hey, win, lose, or draw, there is a level of expectation. If you want to be on this team this year, this week, or moving forward, there is a level of expectation of how you're going to handle yourself, how we're going to practice, how we're going to prepare, how you're going to speak to the media, how you're going to speak on social media. Like, we need to get this thing back on track of what is expected out of NFL players. I have to imagine, knowing Darren and knowing that's where it all starts. Then you can worry about how do you get the ball to Alvin Kamara, and then you can figure out how to best use Taysom Hill and whatnot. But if you don't have everything else, if they don't get that locker room back connected and everybody back on the same page, you can make all the football adjustments you want. It's not going to get any better.
It's so interesting, too, because, I mean, there's so much veteran presence on the Saints roster, whether it's AK, Cam Jordan, Tyrann Mathieu, I mean, guys that have done so much in the league. I would imagine that should help an interim head coach do his job, but at the same time, those guys know what the highest level of success looks like, and this has got to be kind of a tough time for them to face what the Saints are in front of right now.
Yeah, player leadership is still at the root of all successful organizations. Of course, the head coach and the coaching staff and ownership, and there's a lot of levels, but player-led teams, player-led locker rooms are always going to have the longest sustained success. So right now, those guys you just mentioned, they're high-quality guys. They've been around. They know what winning looks like. They've got to take back over that locker room and say, you're either with us or you're not. And you're either moving in the same direction or we're leaving you behind. This is not about, hey, we need to beat Atlanta. We need to win one game. It's bigger than that. This is, we need to get everything in our locker room, everything in our building back in order before we can ever worry about what it's going to take to win a game on Sunday. And they have good leadership. The guys you mentioned have been doing it for a long time and have great reputations and have experienced both personal and team success. And Darren's going to have to rely on them because he's not going to be able to just change that narrative and change that messaging and have it make as big of an impact by himself.
One last thing I wanted to talk to you about on the Falcons front. It feels like a guy that just deserves some flowers. Like, we all know how great Kirk Cousins has been. We've talked a lot about most of his weapons, but I don't feel like anybody's talking about Darnell Mooney, who is on pace for the best season of his career. I thought it was a good signing when they did it, but he seems to even be outplaying that. What have you seen from him? What do you like about the season that he's having?
It was a great signing. Just again, coming off a down year in Chicago, there was some disappointment considering the year before he had a great year, kind of became the forgotten man. DJ Moore came in last year and kind of Mooney kind of slid down the pecking order a little bit. And then you say, okay, we got all these established weapons, right? Of course, Drake London, they wanted to see what they could get out of Kyle Pitts. Of course, you got Bijan Robinson, who's having an unbelievable year in all facets. And then all of a sudden, there's this sneaky guy, Darnell Mooney, who's like the fourth option in some plays on the field. And it feels like every play is a deep shot, is an explosive. I mean, he leads the league in receptions over 20 yards, both going into last week. And obviously last week, I think he had like 2 or 3 more. So he's just explosive. He's productive. He's the perfect complement to the big bodies of Drake London and Kyle Pitts. And then you got that run game where they can pack everybody in there close. And then Mooney and Ray McCloud can get into the secondary and put layers in. So Zach Robinson has a lot of weapons at his disposal. And obviously Kirk Cousins, the trigger man, is doing a great job operating that system. Each week he's getting more and more comfortable with Zach Robinson. So yeah, I'm with you. I think he's the unsung hero of that group, especially of that offense. He's had a great season. And if they're going to, win the division and make a run and make a real playoff push, you got to imagine they're going to continue to find ways for him to impact the game downfield.
They're such a fun team. Kirk's playing great. So many fun weapons on the offense. Jesse Bates is one of the most fun ball hawks on defense. Looking forward to that. And hey, even I know it's tough for the Saints right now, but this is still one of the best rivalries in the NFL. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you have a great call, Greg. I'll talk to you soon, man.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Always good chatting with you. Thanks, man.
Always excited to have Greg on the show, but I'm equally excited for a new guest in this Week 10 preview. We called our friend Dan Hanzus of the Heed the Call podcast to go through some of the best of the rest matchups in this Week 10 slate. We talked about tonight's Thursday night football game, Buccaneers 49ers. We talked about the Steelers going to face the Washington Commanders. And like I said, we had a healthy dose of trade deadline talk as well. All right, joining me now for this Week 10 preview. Really excited about this one. He is one of the co-hosts of the Heed the Call podcast, along with Mark Sessler. The incomparable Dan Hanzus joining me to preview these Week 10 matchups, as well as some trade deadline talk. Dan, how we doing, man?
Very well, David. Thank you for having me on the show. And yeah, Week 10, that's crazy. It does happen quickly. Not to be a cliche, but double digits. Here we go.
On top of that, I wanted to pick your brain about this. I mean, you and Mark have been, you are old heads in the NFL podcast game. You guys have been doing this quite a while, not to date you. But
yeah, old head feels a little pejorative, but yeah, I'm going to take it as a compliment on some level.
But the trade deadline has become such a thing here. I would say, I don't know, in the last like 6 to 8 years, it's really sort of tried to take on that MLB NBA trade deadline thing where we're really talking about movers and shakers. Like, it doesn't seem all that long ago that the trade deadline kind of came and went with a bit of a whimper. Like, do you feel that way, having covered the NFL for as long as you have, to sort of see this thing blow up over time?
Absolutely. And the NFL is famously a copycat league, and it took a couple teams showing some boldness, and then everyone realized, yeah, why aren't we doing this? And you can't live in your fears. And these teams that have roster holes, the opportunity to shore them up, especially in years like this. And I'll point at the NFC as an example. And you saw some moves that teams made in that conference where, yeah, the Lions, they obviously a big time team, and they made a move, obviously, but it's pretty wide open. It feels like a pretty wide open season. And if you have a chance to upgrade your roster, go and do it. So I don't know what took so long for the NFL to realize that the trade deadline is something that could build a good team and turn them into a great team. You see it in the other sports all the time. But yeah, it's made it a lot more fun. And it was also a smart move by the league, and frankly overdue, to push the deadline back as they've done by a week. They could even stand to do it another week, I think. But it was probably part of their global scheme to line it up with election day so they could cannibalize that big part of the American calendar as well.
It gives us something else to talk about besides that, at the very least.
True. Can we talk about your hair, by the way? I got to say, I go on most podcasts and I have the best hair, but I feel like I've been defeated here by David in a big spot.
By defeated, I just think you mean I haven't had a chance to run out to the barber, because like this is getting ridiculous. Honestly,
that's magnificent cabbage, my friend.
Maybe like thank you so much for that. Maybe like it might be a throwback, because the last time we had a major election, it was COVID, and I didn't have to worry about getting my hair. I need to get to the barber shop as soon as we're done here, but I do appreciate that.
Let it rip.
So you mentioned it, and my theory is like, maybe not everybody's willing to go full screw them picks like the LA Rams, but teams just understand that draft picks aren't as valuable as they used to be, or at very came to the reluctant conclusion that they're not going to hit on every single pick. And I think maybe that's why we got to this point. You mentioned the Detroit Lions adding Zadarius Smith early on Tuesday morning. I know you guys did a trade deadline reaction over at Heed the Call. I'm not giving away the goods. Please make sure you go. If you don't, please go check out what Dan and Mark are doing over there. They do great work. But was it Zadarius Smith? Did you have a favorite? Did you have something that really perked up the old eyebrows?
Yeah, I love that move. And I like the way the Lions, because organizationally, and it's just like incredible. Speaking of like how things change over the course of when Mark and I started covering the league, working at NFL Media in 2010, where the Lions were, obviously a laughing stock. And now they just seem to do everything right. And when Aiden Hutchinson goes down a few weeks back, maybe another organization or a different time in Lions history, they make a panic move and they make a trade or give up too much or surrender a first round pick to get someone else. But I feel like they kind of let it play out. They let the trade deadline roll in and then made the play that made sense and didn't give up too much. And I know Zadarius Smith isn't the player he was a few years ago. In fact, his pressure rate is the lowest it's been in a couple of years now. So he might be trending down as a player, but for a Lions team that predictably has seen their pass rush disappear without Hutchinson, you get a feeling that he's going to give some juice to that operation, and Aaron Glenn's going to get the most out of him. So, perfect example. I love that move, and I did love the Commanders seizing the moment. Again, crazy how things change. That report, I don't know where the report comes from, but it kind of gets out there a day before the deadline, a couple days before the deadline. I think it was on ESPN, like, players want to go to Washington at deadline or whatever it was. And sure enough, Marshawn Lattimore goes there. And that's exactly the type of move you want to see your team make. It's like, okay, we have a problem in our back end. So let's seize this moment and say, hey, we're the Commanders and we could be in the NFC title game if we just shore up a couple of things. So Lattimore, I think, not only is he a great player, the deadline can transform players back to their former selves sometimes just by getting out of New Orleans and the vibes over there to get to Washington and the excitement. You might see the best version of Lattimore, which could take their defense to a higher level.
It's been such a theme. I get such a kick out of players that get that new life where, I mean, can you imagine waking up one morning as a member of the Kansas City Chiefs after spending the first 6 weeks of the season on the Tennessee Titans? Like, no disrespect to the Tennessee Titans, but DeAndre Hopkins just has to feel like he has an entirely new lease on life.
Yeah, they're human. And and even if he was being a professional with the Saints, and there's no reason to think he wasn't, there has to be some type of sync that starts to weigh down everybody on that roster. So to all of a sudden be in the middle of a Super Bowl chase has got to be revitalizing for a guy that's in his 7th year and has yet to go to the Super Bowl. The other move that I really liked, and although it wasn't technically obviously a deadline deal, but it happened a couple weeks ago, you're watching DeAndre Hopkins on Monday night, and this is a good stat from Ben Solak. 12.3% chance of completion, and it's that pass downfield between the hash marks, and a great throw by Mahomes, but it's Hopkins between 3 defenders making that catch. It's the most difficult catch a Chiefs receiver has snagged from Mahomes since 2018. And doesn't it feel like that's been missing for the Chiefs for a couple of years now?
Yes.
Like a dog that can make tough catches and help out Mahomes. And leave it to the Chiefs to have the guy that hits the ground running. Like, I am a long-suffering Jets fan, and I know Davante Adams did something finally on Thursday, but even his relationship with Aaron Rodgers, it took a couple weeks for them to seem like they were even vaguely in sync. Hopkins hits the ground running as an immediate difference maker for the Chiefs. So I thought that was a huge move by Kansas City in the wake of the Rashee Rice injury.
Hopkins making that catch very much gave me Bruce Willis and Die Hard vibes, where he's like Patrick Mahomes is like, now I have a machine gun. Like, let's go.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I'm
after
right
walking on glass for the past 2 years.
You mentioned your Jets fandom. I did just want to get your thought. Obviously, Davante Adams, I honestly forgot he was part of the trade deadline because it feels like it happened a lifetime ago. I'm curious about the other Jets receiver. You had a chance to watch Mike Williams. Obviously, he didn't set the world on fire with the Jets, and Aaron Rodgers didn't seem all that upset to lose him to the Steelers. But I do like that move for Pittsburgh. I like both the moves Pittsburgh made, really, where, you're not giving away the farm, but you add a guy who can add to your pass rush and Preston Smith. And at the very least, you hope Mike Williams is a guy who can still go down the field and get the ball for Russell Wilson. I mean, is this copium on my part to think that Mike Williams could do something for the Steelers?
No, I thought it was a great trade, a smart trade. And the compensation 5th round pick is obviously not anything that you're going to lose sleep over. I think Williams and that's another example. So Williams was coming back from the ACL, and he didn't really take part in training camp until the back end. And I don't even know if he was he even activated for the initial weeks. If he was, he had a very minor role in the offense initially.
Right.
And then him and Rodgers couldn't get on the same page. And then once they had a really bad miscommunication in that London game, it felt like that was kind of the beginning of the end of the marriage. And then the Adams trade happens, and it was basically just a matter of time. But if you watched every Jets snap on offense, there were moments in a couple of the games. The Tennessee game is one instance that pops in mind where you saw that Mike Williams play, that ability to to win one-on-one contested catches downfield. He's got unbelievable hand-eye coordination and getting feet down on the sideline, and that type of special big play ability. And I know we're not talking about Russell Wilson of 2014 anymore, but he's shown since he's taken over as the starter in Pittsburgh that moon ball is still in play. And again, the difference between organizations that are run poorly, like the Jets, and organizations that are run really well, like the Steelers, is like, I think the Steelers identified that, waited for the right moment. Like the Jets panicked when their season was spiraling and went and got Devontae Adams a couple of weeks back, and they have like a 15% chance to make the playoffs. The Steelers waited it out, got to the deadline, got the guy they want, and they're ready to make their push. So I would not be surprised if Williams really pairs well with Pickens and they get better on offense as a result.
Since we're already talking about this, one of the games I wanted to hit on with you is it's one of the games of the weekend, the Pittsburgh Steelers going to face the Washington Commanders. And I wanted to pick your brain on this. Do you think I'm crazy if it feels like, the Pittsburgh Steelers with all their Lombardi trophies, Russell Wilson with his 9 Pro Bowl selections, Mike Tomlin never had a losing record? I think the Steelers have more to prove in this game than the upstart Washington Commanders. Do you think I'm crazy?
No, I don't think you're crazy, because I know exactly what you mean. I think there is a feeling, and I think I'm kind of probably in that camp too, that the Steelers have had a nice start to their season. They handled the switch at quarterback, which could have been dicey, could have been a locker room loser potentially, but instead they made the move at the right time, and then Wilson helped them out by playing well, and they continued to win. But how about like a true signature win to their season? Because everyone's in on the Commanders. Everyone sees that as a team that with Daniels at quarterback has emerged as, the NFC East, perhaps the favorite, the Eagles and the Commanders. I could see that going down to the very end of the season. So the Steelers, though, if they can get a signature win here, that changes, I think, their standing in the AFC, and they go from good team to, okay, this is a team that you might need to take serious, and the Ravens in the North have to understand that this isn't going to be a division that gets handed to them. So, yeah, I think if the Commanders beat the Steelers, they'd be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That's within the realm of what we've seen so far this season, and they could take care of a team that maybe is limited on offense, and the Commanders are on a record-setting pace in terms of getting into the red zone every time they have the ball. But if the Steelers take down that offense a notch, and they make those big plays with Pickens and perhaps Mike Williams, it does change. It changed perception of who the Steelers are, and so it's a golden opportunity for them, really.
How much has your perception already changed of the Steelers? Because I will say, they beat up on the Jets. They beat the New York Giants. They've looked much more impressive since they made the switch, to your point. I just said I'd like to see more from Pittsburgh, but I do think the Steelers look like a team with a higher ceiling than what we've gotten used to in this post-Ben Roethlisberger era.
Yeah, I kind of had them pegged as a classic modern-day Steelers team, which is 9-8, that kind of range. Maybe if a couple things go their way, 10-7, and they're a playoff team again. So yeah, they've over-indexed from my preseason thoughts, and you look at the schedule. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, like they won their first 3 games at Atlanta, at Denver. Nice matchups for them. Home Chargers, and then they lose at Colts, home Cowboys, and then their last 3 wins at Raiders, home Jets at their lowest point, home Giants. So this at Commanders versus Ravens, back-to-back 1-2 punch. Yeah, it's going to tell us a lot about how serious we should take them. I think these are the type of litmus tests that you see from multiple teams every year where you're not sure they have a good record, but they fattened up on some bad teams, and then this will give us a better idea of where they're at. So yeah, it's one of them. You got me kind of more pumped up to watch the Steelers. Usually not a team that pumps me up, and I talk about it on the podcast a lot. That the Steelers, although I respect them organizationally, they're a bit of a tough watch because they just grind out those wins. Like 17-13 games aren't usually my cup of tea. Russell Wilson has given them a little bit more juice, which is kind of ironic considering what we've seen from Wilson in recent years. But yeah, maybe now with Mike Williams and the season gaining some momentum, their offense can get to a higher level and they become a true contender. We'll see.
Nobody's more surprised than me because I said several times in the offseason, like, does it matter who starts at quarterback?
Right. I think everyone had that kind of outlook on it. Yeah.
When Russell Wilson uncorked that deep ball to George Pickens in the second half against the Giants, it was like the meme where the guy playing video games like sits up in his seat. I was like, yes. Whoa, all right. I care a lot more about this Steelers team than I did 4 or 5 weeks ago. That's for sure. That is happening in the early window on CBS. In the early window over here on Fox, the 49ers going to Tampa Bay. Buccaneers going to have a short week to rebound from the way that Monday night game ended in Kansas City. And from the sounds of it, there's at least a realistic shot that Christian McCaffrey plays in this game, Dan. To what degree, if we just assume that happens, we're recording this on Wednesday. These sorts of things can age terribly if you're not hip to the podcast game. But if we assume Christian McCaffrey plays, to what degree are the 49ers back?
I think, no Brandon Ayuk that hurts. I mean, I think, and it's interesting because they've had such a up and down season so far, and Ayuk never found his footing even before the injury, and that they had not unlocked that connection. And Debo's been in and out of the lineup, but no McCaffrey. He's obviously, my old buddy Dave Damashek called it the Jenga piece. Like, he's the Jenga piece for their whole operation. And to see, I'm very curious if he does play, and if he doesn't play this week, it would be next week, barring a setback, how they plan to deploy him, because Jordan Mason has done a nice job filling in for him. He's had some trouble staying healthy as well, though, but I feel like it would make sense that you don't all of a sudden give Christian McCaffrey the ball 30 times a game. I know fantasy owners want Christian McCaffrey to have the same workload, but you get the feeling that this might be a ramp up where they're going to want to kind of ease him back into the fish tank, as it were. So let's see how many touches he has. But I think what he'll do in terms of opening up that offense and serving as that safety valve for Brock Purdy is going to be invaluable. So they're the team in the NFC that I'm ready and expecting them to make that push. I think a lot of people are. And it would not surprise me if a month from now the Niners haven't lost and McCaffrey's playing at a high level, and it'll be like, okay, obviously they got off that bye. They have a great coaching staff that made adjustments. They got their most important player back, and then they finally started to go. Would not surprise me at all.
It's not fair based on everything. They lost Brandon Ayuk. They've had all of this injury issues and attrition. That's still what I expect of them. Like I've watched them go on so many runs. I expect them to win 8 of the last 9 or whatever it is. So I'm curious to see if they live up to that.
And my only other point about the Niners is, and I wonder about this, like I'm a Yankees fan, which not great right now. But something during the Derek Jeter years when George Steinbrenner was running the team, it became known as, I think it was coined by Buster Olney, then of the New York Times, the Steinbrenner doctrine, which was anything short of a world championship is considered failure. And that became a weight that sat on that organization, made life so much more difficult, and the pressure of it all. I wonder, like, if that at a certain point has started to creep in San Francisco to get so close all these years, and if some of the struggles of this season are also about that, like, man, we have to grind through this whole regular season just to get back to January to prove that we're not the team that people think we are, the team that gets near the mountaintop and never can get quite over. So I feel like, is there a mental hurdle that San Francisco is battling a little bit too, that's built up over all these years of near misses?
The vast majority of fan bases are not going to feel bad for the 49ers with how good they've been, but that feels like a tough place to be, where at least the Chiefs have the trophies to fall back on. The Niners do not, and they still have very similar expectations where it's like, if
Right.
you're not playing in the last game of the year, absolutely nobody's going to be happy with how this thing went. I don't want to completely ignore the Bucs side of this either, though. Like, I mean, it feels like we kind of collectively wrote them off when Mike Evans and Chris Godwin went down. They've lost 2 games since then, but looked surprisingly good. And I do want to note, it's widely expected Evans will be able to come back after their bye week. They only play one more team with a winning record after this San Francisco game. Like, the schedule eases up in a big way when they're done with this gauntlet. So even if they can't get a win here, and I'm not ruling that out, but even if they can't, I do feel like there is potential for the Bucs to put together a late season run here.
I think so too, and I'm done doubting Baker. I've never been a Baker guy. And just like a lot of people when he had success last year, I was like, well, Dave Canales was the schemer behind it, and then you had these 2 all-pro receivers. And now you fast forward to the last couple of weeks, and he doesn't have any of those 3 guys, and they continue to move the football. And Liam Cohen obviously deserves credit. The rest of the Bucs that are still on the field deserve credit, but Baker deserves the most credit, and which is part of the reason I was so annoyed with Todd Bowles for like, God, do you realize, like, I know Baker's not Joe Montana, but that guy knows when a moment arrives and how to rise to that moment. Give him the chance to get a 2-point conversion, because that could have changed their entire season if they could have stole that one in Arrowhead. But to your point, yeah, as long as they don't rush Evans back, because we know how a hamstring, especially with a guy in his early 30s, can ruin a season. I expect them at this point. I don't doubt Baker anymore. I don't doubt this offense. They're going to continue to score points. Their defense has not been good this year, and Bowles has to get that figured out, or I think it's going to cost him his job at the end of the season. But in that division, I absolutely think they can get back in that race. I know they got swept by the Falcons, so they're actually an extra game out. But to see the idea that the Tampa can stack some wins against bad teams like they've done in the last few years when they've been winning division titles, Falcons come down a little bit, would not surprise me at all if that's a division fight in the last 2 weeks.
I recognize this would be a better question for your co-host, Mark Sessler, longtime Cleveland Browns fan.
Yep. We know how to pick them, don't we? Jets and Browns, huh?
Sorry about that, guy. Hey, I've covered the Dallas Cowboys for most of the last 12 years, so I hear you. I'm not trying to say Baker Mayfield's perfect, right? But every time I think about the hellish directions that Cleveland has gone in the quarterback department over the last 5 years, it feels like he was discarded faster than almost any number 1 pick in recent memory, where things went south his last year in Cleveland. He was playing through an injury, and that was just it. Like, the league just collectively decided the guy couldn't play, and here he is a few years later playing really, really good football. Like, it's weird in retrospect to think about how quickly the Browns were done with that whole thing.
I agree, and he felt like such a perfect fit in Cleveland. This guy with all this moxie who didn't care about the past, and he had big moments, obviously, including that playoff win in the pandemic year. And yeah, the Browns, like we were saying, bad organizations make mistakes and they repeat mistakes. And to bail on him, yeah, he had, like, I think it was a shoulder issue that really jacked up his last year in Cleveland, and they sold on him. And at the same time, he's not even the most prominent former number 1 overall pick to be totally discarded and then prove everybody wrong. That's Jared Goff. So, like, it happens. Like, it's not just the Browns, but that he just felt, especially given the fact that the Browns essentially sold their soul to get Deshaun Watson and then got nothing out of it. It's almost like a mistake that continues to compound itself, which is very Cleveland.
You are not wrong. Yeah, I mean, Jared Goff is a great example. At least the LA Rams got tangible return on that decision, whereas the Browns are in the wilderness once again. That's a topic that could for another day. Real quickly, though, last thing I want to touch on with you, that's tonight's game, Thursday Night Football. On paper, it's as good as you could ask for. Hopefully it lives up to it. These Thursday night games often don't, but at the very least, I'm trusting that angry Joe Burrow and what Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry are doing, like this feels like it has high potential to deliver on the hype, even if it is Thursday Night Football.
Yeah, this has got shootout written all over it. I love the idea of Burrow on the road in prime time with something to prove. It's like Groundhog Day. The Cincinnati Bengals once again started slow, and now they're making a charge. But if you don't, at some point, you're going to have to really deliver a signature win to the season that really turns things over and puts them in a new direction. So what would be better than taking out the Ravens in this setting? And I fully expect Burrow to show up. He's, despite the ups and downs to their season, he has never stopped playing at a high level. And, I think the short week hurts them, obviously, with Higgins, and we'll see how that plays out. But, I think it's going to come down to, can Cincinnati slow down Baltimore at all offensively? Because it's crazy. Like Lamar Jackson, he keeps winning the MVP and then getting better. And, I think he, to me, is the heavy favorite right now to win another MVP. And if you win your third MVP, before your 30th birthday, that you're entering into a different stratosphere in terms of quarterbacks. Now he's going to have, like the Niners in January and early February, potentially, like he's going to eventually have to stack something else to cement who he is and where he stands historically. But right now, he is like the last quarterback that I want to face when I'm on the road in prime time, because I know he's going to eat and he's going to do damage. So this one, like, if you like points, I feel like we're going to get a double 30 burger, maybe even more. And the Bengals, who nearly took out Baltimore, of course, early in the season, they get a chance at revenge. That game was 41-38. Would this surprise me if it's similar? It would not.
Definitely on that. The first game between these two is on the short list for game of the year. And I've said this a few times, but like it's easy to gloss over how close the Ravens came to losing that game. Lamar fumbles on his own 38 or whatever yard line it was, and the Bengals botch an opportunity for a game-winning field goal because they were the second team with the ball. Cincinnati is 7th in points scored and 8th in points allowed. Like, I made a joke about it. It's the talk of the week that Joe Burrow looked so pissed throughout that Vegas game. Why wouldn't he be? They're scoring 27 points a game and they're below 500. I would be furious if I was Joe Burrow. He would be, I think most people agree, like Lamar is here in terms of MVP. Joe Burrow would be like right here with Jared Goff if Cincinnati was 6-3. And they honestly should be, between the New England loss and the first Baltimore loss. Like, there's no reason this team needs to be below 500.
Yeah. And the MVP is, in some ways, a narrative-based game. And in primetime, if you deliver like a primetime shootout and you win, and Burrow beats Lamar, even if they're obviously never on the field at the same time, that the MVP race could change quickly if Cincinnati goes on a hot streak. And one thing I would do if I was Joe Burrow, the one thing I do before kickoff on Thursday, I walk into Zach Taylor's office and I'll tell him, I remember what you did the last time we played these guys, when we had a chance to put them away and you took the ball out of my hands and ran the ball 3 times in overtime and then missed a 53-yarder. Let me win the goddamn game, and do not take the ball out of my hands because I'm the best player on the field. Like, Burrow has that juice to him, or Riz, as my sons would tell me. So don't take away the Burrow Riz. Let the Riz carry you to a W in this game.
I'm gonna clip that out and I'll put it somewhere on social and tag Joe, because yes, that's exactly what Zach Taylor needs to hear after the last one. Hopefully that game lives up to the hype. Loaded slate this weekend. Dan, hope you enjoy it. Loved chatting with you, man. We'll have to do this again another time.
Absolutely. And don't let my 10 and 8-year-old sons see that clip, because they will call it cringe. So that's how it works.
In the late window on Sunday, a big NFC East rivalry that has taken a bit of a turn here in the last week. Dak Prescott obviously injuring his hamstring against the Atlanta Falcons. He will not face the Philadelphia Eagles, but despite that, Cooper Rush, 5-1 as a Cowboys starter. On top of that, the Eagles, for all of their many successes, have not won at AT&T Stadium since the 2019 season. They will have a chance to right that in the late window. Feels like a perfect opportunity to talk about our On the Road segment. It's presented by Honda. Dreams are unstoppable. to preview this matchup. Anytime we're going to talk NFC East, why wouldn't we call in our guy, Fox Sports reporter Ralph Vacchiano? Ralph, how we doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I just got done, take people behind the scenes, working on our Cowboys corner piece that we like to do, checking in on all things Cowboys. I just got done sending you over my answers earlier this afternoon. Long story short, it's feeling a little bleak in Dallas, which has been a theme for the season, obviously, but when the starting quarterback goes down, definitely for a few weeks, maybe for even longer than that, details coming out earlier on Wednesday that his hamstring partially came off of his bone. I'm not a doctor, but that sounds like longer than a 4-week injury. I mean, what else can go wrong for the Dallas Cowboys, Ralph?
Well, that's a dangerous question to ask because sometimes when you think nothing else could possibly be worse, they find a new way to redefine that. So, but yeah, right now this does feel like rock bottom for them. It does feel like a lost season. It feels like one of those years, and every franchise, well, not every franchise, the Chiefs haven't had one in a decade, but most of them will have years where just, the little things start to go wrong, and then before you know it, everything snowballs. And they lose DeMarcus Lawrence, they lose Micah Parsons, they lose Brandon Cooks. Now they lose Dak Prescott. CeeDee Lamb is banged up on top of all of the issues that they had before, the lack of action in the offseason, their bad running game, and on and on and on. So, it's a mess. And I think we were pretty much in agreement on this when we thought about, what could the Cowboys do to salvage their season. It always came down to heroics from Dak Prescott, that he was good enough to maybe sometimes put the team on his shoulders and carry them, and maybe not to the playoffs, but certainly to some wins. Now he's gone for 3-4 more weeks. Who knows at this point? So it's bleak. There's no real way to spin this in a good way for the Cowboys.
Let's at least try to spin it forward for them, because we did disagree on one thing. And clearly this is not what anybody was hoping for in this first matchup between the Eagles and Cowboys. It's typically marquee television, two teams at the top of the NFC East. That's not the case right now. But you and I disagreed on the role that Trey Lance should play going forward. Obviously, I mean, I'm not saying Trey Lance needs to be starting in this game. Cooper Rush has earned the right at that look. But with Dak Prescott going down and the Cowboys offense being a mess anyway, I kind of would like to see Trey Lance have some sort of role. The one thing that he did really well in the preseason was carry the ball. I mean, he is an electric athlete. He can move. Given how poorly everything else is going, I would like to see Mike McCarthy come up with some sort of package for Trey Lance, even if it's just like red zone touches. It really feels to me like you can't do a whole lot worse.
Well, that's certainly fair. If you're advocating, let's change things up on offense, I can't disagree with that. What they've got going right now doesn't work. Certainly in the red zone, if it's certainly something that can be a jolt to their rushing attack, which essentially otherwise doesn't really exist, all that is fair. If you want to put him in for some spot plays, I don't know that I would fully disagree with that. I just think that, I don't want to get a real look at him in an extended role at this point. Maybe Jerry Jones thinks he's the future, but they're not mathematically eliminated just yet. They might be able to stay above water in the NFC East or in the NFC playoff picture with Cooper Rush if they can somehow win a couple of games. It's not ridiculous to think they're not going to win a Super Bowl, but they could probably, get lucky enough and win a couple of games to stay alive. They can't do that, I don't think, with Trey Lance. Once the season's over, once you reach a record where you're like, there's no chance anymore, maybe it's not mathematical, but we know it's over, then I'd want to see what he's like and what he can do and try to decide on, if he has a role here for the future. But and if you're talking, a drive or two, a play or two here or there, a red zone situation, why not put him in? Just something to change up the offense to give the Cowboys a little different look.
Yeah, I think there's a time to talk about Trey Lance as a starter, and it's December if they keep this trajectory going. There will be 2, 3, 4 weeks at the end of the year where you can give Trey Lance a look. I'm with you. Right now, I think it's got to be Cooper Rush, but I don't know, man. If I can get Trey Lance in there for half a dozen plays, even if they're all runs, anything to try to find a spark for what has looked like for most of the year one of the slowest offenses in the NFL.
It couldn't hurt. If he goes in there and he's bad, well, he's, as bad running the ball as Rico Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott were. So who cares? So you tried something. So, unless it's a disaster and he starts fumbling the ball, in which case you don't go back to him anymore. So, I don't have a problem with that. Give him a shot. Give them a little bit of a different look, some kind of package. If you use him that way, maybe it could work.
Let's talk about the much more impressive side of this matchup. Obviously, Philly has really hit their stride. It feels like not that long ago that Nick Sirianni was in trouble with his own fan base during that win against Cleveland, but you beat up on the Giants and the Bengals. I know that they almost gave that game to Jacksonville away, but if you watched it, even that game, they outplayed the Jags for the vast majority of that. There were some wonky plays. I really think the Eagles are on a tear. They look like a team that's turned a corner since they've gotten healthier. Or am I getting a little too carried away with myself?
No, I think they're really hitting their stride right now. They're playing very, very well. I think some of that has to do with they've sort of remembered who they are. They are relying on their run game a lot more than they did early in the season, certainly than they did last season. And if you listen to the criticism of fans in Philadelphia, and if you hear kind of the underlying criticism that sometimes comes from players, when it sounds like, if you read between the lines, they're a little concerned. It always comes back to they're not running the ball enough, because that's what they do well with Jalen Hurts. That's what they went and got Saquon Barkley for. Now they're doing it. They can just be bullies, just kind of running through defenses, and that sets up their passing game. And when they're struggling, they're not doing it. They're doing it the opposite way. But Nick Sirianni, he's gotten the message. So is Kellen Moore. He's gotten the message. They're starting to do what they're best at, what their players like to do, and you're seeing an offense that's starting to look a little bit like it did in 2022 when they made the Super Bowl run. They're not fully healthy. AJ Brown's banged up. Devonta Smith is banged up. So and Dallas Goedert, their tight end, is probably just coming back for this game. So once they get healthy, they're still running the ball and they still have all those offensive weapons. You can see them really get on a roll.
The identity of the Eagles is always going to center around just that absurd collection of talent on offense. But I do see signs of legitimate improvement from their defense. We were talking about them like they were one of the worst units in the league, and they were playing like it, to be fair, in the first few weeks of the season. They looked absolutely overmatched against Tampa Bay early on in the year. And I get that they haven't played a lot of impressive offenses, but Vic Fangio's got the secondary playing well. You're getting contributions from a guy like Nakobe Dean, who clinched the win last week. Again, is this me overestimating it because they've gotten to play the Jags and the Browns and the Giants, or do we see this group turning a corner as well?
I think it might have a little to do with the competition, but I think that, individually, there are players playing better. You mentioned Nakobe Dean. The young secondary certainly is starting to shine. They're getting a bit more of a pass rush out of really everybody along their defensive front. What it looks to me, and they're not going to admit this, I don't think, but what looks to me is that maybe they were struggling adjusting to Vic Fangio's scheme early in the season, and that's why they were having the breakdowns and not getting the pressure that they needed. And players just seem to step slow. They're starting to get it, I think, and they're starting to play like we think they can play. And yeah, the competition definitely helps, but if they can start building their confidence against those teams that they should be, that's going to carry over, especially if they really are building their confidence in the defensive scheme and the play calls too.
I don't want to overlook the Cowboys because it is still it's a division rivalry. These are teams that are very familiar with each other. Spread's only 7 points in Dallas, which I find a little bit surprising given the way the Cowboys have defended the run. But what I was going to say is, even if this game isn't, all that to watch, the next Thursday, Philadelphia versus Washington, maybe that'll be a really true test of where the Eagles stand and how much they've improved, because that sounds like a matchup worth getting really excited about, even if this Cowboys game isn't.
Yeah, that could be a huge game in the division. I think the Washington Commanders are still trying to get people to really believe in them, and me included in that, because they have played a relatively weak schedule. They played well in the couple of games against tougher opponents. They're playing overall better on the offensive line, better on defense than I thought they'd be. And of course, Jaden Daniels is one of the best players in the league already. But the desire, I think, is for everybody to let's see what they do against the really good teams. And if they can stand up to the Philadelphia Eagles, beat them, assuming there's no setbacks this weekend, they could open up a 2-game lead in the division. That'll say a lot for them. And for the Eagles, it's the opposite. They want to remind everybody, hey, we're the power in this division right now. And they know the Commanders are good, and they know how good and dangerous Jaden Daniels can be. Might be one of the better teams they've faced so far this season. So that is an absolutely huge game to watch. A little bit more important than the Cowboys game, but bigger test than the Cowboys game, obviously. But, that's the one I think everybody's looking forward to.
That's why this league is the best, Ralph, because nobody would have believed you in August if you'd said, the Cowboys the Eagles can't afford to fall asleep against the Cowboys because they got to prove themselves against those first place Commanders. What a fun story. I'm guessing we'll be checking in with you about that when the time comes. Always love talking to you, man. I'll catch up with you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
Time now for the Super 6 presented by DraftKings. You know the drill. Head on over to foxsports.com or the Fox Sports app. The Super 6 lets you pick from 6 different bets. You choose a winner in 6 different categories. Sometimes it's a game. Sometimes it's a yardage prop. Sometimes last week we had a field goal prop, which I nailed, by the way. Love giving kickers their just due. We got 2 for you this week in the Super 6. I'm going to do my best to help you make your picks in 2 categories. We do have an international game. The Panthers playing the New York Giants over in Munich. We will hit that one in a minute. But first, a prop that I dialed in on immediately would be which tight end will have the most receiving yards in Week 10? Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Evan Ingram, or Cade Otton? And I jumped at a chance to give Cade Otton some love here because I wrote the Buccaneers off when Chris Godwin and Mike Evans got hurt, as did a lot of people. Meanwhile, Cade Otton has really stepped up as the centerpiece of their offense while those 2 receivers are hurt. I was tempted to take Travis Kelce. I know how many passes he's caught the last 2 weeks. I know that he's really gotten back to what we remember Travis Kelce being, but DeAndre Hopkins is there now. You got all these different options Patrick Mahomes likes to focus on, whether it's Samaje Perine, the chunk shots to Xavier Worthy. There's enough there to where I don't completely trust Travis Kelce to have 3 double-digit catch games in a row. Meanwhile, since Mike Evans and Chris Godwin got hurt, Cade Otton leads the NFL among tight ends in routes run and in targets. He's been targeted 37 times in the last month. He's caught 27 passes in that same time frame. For the time being, until Mike Evans comes back at the very least, like I said, he's the centerpiece of the Buccaneers offense. Baker Mayfield gets him the ball on screens, on short routes. He does stretch the field from time to time. He's the guy that you have to focus on first before you can worry about getting the run game going or any of that good stuff. So I feel really good about Cade Otton getting double-digit targets and double-digit catches, which is why I'm picking him to lead this category in receiving yards. For the other one, let's go to the international game. Who will have the most receiving yards among 2 Panthers receivers and 2 Giants receivers? Will it be Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Coker, or Xavier Legette? I'm not going to overthink this one. I did a boatload of research on Cade Otton for the first prop. For this one, I just know the Panthers are not good. They struggle to throw the ball. Even since Bryce Young came back, this is not an explosive offense. And Malik Neighbors is top 15 in the league in receiving yards. And that's even after missing some time with a concussion. 55 catches, 557 receiving yards. He is in a different category all his own from the rest of the guys in this category. So I'm just going to roll with the obvious choice. I think it'll be Malik Neighbors. And, if you're wrong, you charge it to the game, but I bet I won't be. One last thing to get to in this preview episode, and that is our hurry up offense. We've got 8 more matchups we haven't touched on, but we're going to give you something before this show is over to cover you for the other games on the docket, give you something to know before you head in to your Week 10. Let's get into it. As always, my wonderful producers are going to put 2 minutes on the clock. I'm going to beat it. There's 4 teams on a bye week this week. I'm going to get in under the buzzer, and we're going to start it off right now with an AFC West grudge match. The Broncos at the Chiefs, a surprisingly hotly contested game over the last 3 years. Margin of victory has been just 8 points the last 3 seasons. But Steve Spagnuolo, 5-2 versus rookie quarterbacks as the Chiefs DC. I like Spags to beat Bo Nix. Dolphins at Rams. Dolphins are 0-2 since Tua Tagovailoa came back from that concussion, but he does have a passer rating of 111 since he returned. That's top 10 in the league. I'm expecting some fireworks on Monday Night Football here. Bills at Colts, 2 interesting stats to know. The Bills are scoring 2 more touchdowns per game at home than they are on the road. This game is on the road. Colts have also been in a 1-possession game all 9 weeks of the season. Be closer than you might think. Vikings at Jags. Only 2 teams in the league have scored 20-plus points in all of their games this year. One is very unsurprising. That would be Baltimore. The other is Minnesota. I don't want to call it surprising. We know they've been good, but good on you, Sam Darnold. I don't think I realized they had been quite that consistent. Jets at Cardinals. It's been 32 consecutive starts without a 300-yard game for Aaron Rodgers. He's going against a bottom 5 pass defense in the Cardinals, and the game is indoors. Maybe this is the week. Patriots at Bears. The Bears have the toughest remaining schedule in the league according to opponent win percentage. It is all playoff contenders after this game against the Patriots. Feels like one you don't want to let slip away. Titans at Chargers. Justin Herbert has had a passer rating of 90 or better in all 8 of his games this year. The only other quarterbacks to do that in the modern era are all possible or likely Hall of Famers. Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Phillip Rivers. That is remarkable for a guy who's not getting a lot of attention. Giants versus Panthers in Munich. It is the worst scoring offense in New York versus the worst scoring defense in Carolina. That could get wacky. Nailed it. Just like I said. Yeah, maybe incentive to turn on the early Germany game. A movable object versus a stoppable force. The old wacky version of that game. We'll see if maybe the Giants can put up some points on the Panthers defense. I don't know if I did a great job of selling you, but as a sicko, I will be tuned in. I bet you will be too. So many fun games to look forward to this weekend. That does it for the Week 10 preview. We will be back on the other side of the weekend to recap everything. We'll have insight, analysis. We'll be talking to all of our friends in the booths from all of these great games. Look forward to Monday Night Football. We'll assess everything we saw. You know the drill. Can't wait to talk to you again. Make sure you're subscribed to the show. If you're not, go find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your pods. Make sure you're subscribed so we are there for you on Monday to get into everything. Go give us a follow on all of the socials. Find us on YouTube. Go check out the YouTube channel. Leave a comment. We would love it if you did. I think that just about covers everything. I think that's all the housekeeping. Just all that's left now. It's time for some football. Enjoy your Week 10. We'll talk to you real soon. I appreciate it.